picture the scene. You're
Yeah.
standing in a harshly lit conference room. You've got this sticky note name tag peeling off your lapel.
Oh, I know the exact feeling.
Right. And you are holding a lukewarm cup of coffee, just in a desperate attempt to give your hand something to do.
Yeah, a little prop to hold on to.
Exactly. And then someone at the front of the room cheerfully announces that before the morning strategy meeting begins, everyone is going to pair up
Uh-oh.
and share their most embarrassing middle school memory.
Mm-hmm.
It is the dreaded corporate icebreaker.
Hmm.
You can almost feel the collective temperature in the room plummet.
Everyone just braces for it.
Yeah, the sheer agonizing awkwardness of that ritual.
That visceral cringe you just described is, well, it's a very specific type of modern dread.
It really is.
But we use the phrase so casually today to describe these low-stakes social games like, let's break the ice.
Just a harmless little activity.
Right. It sounds completely harmless, a little bit silly, maybe mildly uncomfortable, but, ultimately trivial.
And yet, when you actually pull back the layers on the linguistic journal article we're using for our deep dive today.
Which is a fascinating read, by the way.
Oh, totally. The origins of that phrase involve absolutely zero name tags, zero polite small talk, and a whole lot of literal, terrifying shattering of frozen water.
Yeah, it's intense.
We're taking this extensive etymological source about the origins of the phrase breaking the ice. And our mission today is to uncover how this everyday team-building concept is actually rooted in the highly dangerous realities of maritime history.
And eventually, 16th century literature.
Yes.
To truly understand where this idiom comes from and, why it still holds such immense psychological weight for us today, we have to look at the intersection of early modern global trade routes and the organic evolution of language.
It's a wild transition.
It really is a fascinating journey, going from sheer physical survival to social survival and the mechanics of how human beings confront invisible barriers.
Okay, let's unpack this, because right now, an icebreaker, it's basically just a forced mechanism to learn names at a gathering.
Right.
But the etymological records pull us back to a time when breaking the ice wasn't a metaphor at all. It was literal.
Very literal.
We are talking about the early modern period. So an era largely defined by the massive, aggressive expansion of global trade routes.
And in European colonialism, yeah.
Exactly. And this sudden expansion created a very immediate, highly lethal physical problem for a specific group of people.
Well, consider the seafaring nations of Southern Europe at the time. You had generations of sailors who had spent their entire maritime careers navigating the Mediterranean Sea.
Which is relatively predictable, right?
Very predictable. Warm equatorial waters. They were culturally and technologically adapted to warm climates.
Okay.
They had reliable trade winds and, most importantly, liquid oceans.
Right, liquid being the operative word there.
Exactly. But as global exploration and the pursuit of new colonial markets pushed these trade routes further and further north.
Up into the Baltic Sea.
The Baltic Sea, the Arctic Circle, these warm water sailors suddenly found themselves confronting a geographical reality their ships were completely unprepared for.
Solid water.
Solid water.
It must have been an absolute shock to the system. I mean, you sail north to establish this lucrative new spice or timber route, relying entirely on the wind to push you forward.
And then nothing.
Yeah, your massive wooden galleon just stops. The river or the coastal canal is frozen solid.
It's a terrifying scenario.
When you look at the maritime records of the era, you see this sudden, desperate need for human icebreakers in northern climates.
And we aren't talking about the massive nuclear-powered, steel-reinforced ships we use today to cut through the Arctic.
No, not at all. We're talking about human beings who are literally enlisted to shatter the frozen rivers using primitive hand tools.
The sheer physical labor of that is just staggering to think about.
I can't even imagine.
You have to remember the mechanics of wooden sailing ships. If a ship gets becalmed in freezing water, it isn't just stuck.
It's in danger.
Grave danger. Pack ice acts like a slow-motion vise.
Oh, wow.
As the water freezes and expands around a wooden hull, the kinetic pressure can literally crush the ship into splinters.
And drag it under.
Yes. So the crews had to get out onto the ice itself.
Just out on the frozen ocean.
Literally walking on it, swinging heavy iron axes and hooked pikes, just chopping away at the frozen surface hour after hour to facilitate basic movement.
And as they move from the relatively shallow canals out into the open ocean, the danger must have escalated exponentially.
Oh, absolutely. Out on the open water, a sudden freeze or a hidden ice flow wasn't just an inconvenience.
It was a death sentence for a massive trade vessel.
Exactly. So the solution they engineered was to send small, fragile rowboats out ahead of the larger ships.
Oh, okay.
The crews in those little boats would literally hack the ice apart by hand to carve out a safe passageway for the massive, expensive vessel looming behind them.
That is wild. It's less like a snowplow clearing a highway and more like walking through an active minefield to clear a path for a tank.
That is a perfect analogy.
You're the fragile, exposed thing taking on all the kinetic danger, absorbing the risk so the heavily armored, valuable cargo behind you can survive.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this literal act of breaking the ice was the crucial, high-stakes mechanism actively driving early global capitalism.
Because without those small boats taking on that terrifying risk, the big ships couldn't move.
Right. The flow of spices, textiles, timber, it would cease entirely. The expansion of empires would quite literally freeze in place.
So the ice was a formidable, life-threatening barrier to human progress at that time.
It was. It was such a fundamental battle against nature that modern naval forces still pour billions into specialized ice-breaking vessels today.
The technology has evolved from iron axes to reinforced steel hulls, but the underlying struggle is the exact same.
Exactly the same.
Okay, I understand the physical danger of being in that rowboat. The terror of a freezing ocean swell while you swing an axe at a block of ice is incredibly vivid.
It's a haunting image.
But I'm stuck. How do we go from a terrified sailor with an axe in the Baltic Sea to a wide-thread metaphor in English and Latin literature by the 16th century?
It does feel like a massive cultural leap.
Yeah. Were Elizabethan playwrights hanging out on polar trade expeditions?
Well, no, but the mechanism of how that language transferred is actually one of the most fascinating aspects of linguistic history.
Okay, how did it happen?
You have to picture the ecosystem of a 16th century trade hub like London. Port cities were intense melting pots.
Lots of different people mixing together.
Right. You had sailors returning from these harrowing northern voyages, dragging their maritime jargon into the taverns, the docks, the public square.
Oh, I see. Just like how military jargon or internet slang bleeds into our mainstream vocabulary today.
Precisely. The sailors' profound relief at surviving an ice-breaking mission became synonymous with surviving any incredibly daunting first step.
That makes total sense.
So the playwrights and scholars who were soaking up the culture of the city adopted the phrase. They used it to describe anyone willing to take the first, most dangerous hit in a difficult endeavor.
A trailblazer, essentially. Someone willing to walk into the minefield first so the rest of the group can follow safely.
Yes, and the historical record gives us a perfect, high-profile example of this newly minted metaphor in action.
William Shakespeare.
William Shakespeare's play, The Taming of the Shrew.
Yes.
Looking at how Shakespeare deploys the phrase reveals everything about how the culture viewed it. In the play, the character Tranio is imploring his friend Petruchio to, quote, break the ice and do this feat, achieve the elder, set the younger free.
Right, because we all know the basic dynamic of the play. The younger sister Bianca can't be wed until the famously sharp-tongued, difficult older sister Katharina is married off first.
Exactly. So Tranio is explicitly asking Petruchio to be the one to woo Katharina,
thereby clearing the path for the other suitors to access Bianca.
You've got it.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because when we hear the phrase break the ice today in a social context, we automatically think of, like, offering someone a donut.
Or asking about their weekend.
Right. We view it as a polite lowering of the stakes kind of thing. But if you look at the psychology of Shakespeare's characters in that specific scene, approaching Katharina wasn't about making pleasant small talk over a cup of tea.
Not at all.
To those men, wooing Katharina was viewed as a dangerous, monumental, almost impossible undertaking. Petruchio isn't just saying hello.
No. He is being asked to survive a catastrophic social shipwreck.
Exactly. The analogy holds up perfectly when you look at the kinetic energy of the interaction. Petruchio is the little wooden rowboat.
Yes.
He's being sent into the terrifying, frozen wasteland of Katharina's temper.
He's expected to take all the damage, absorb the rejection, and shatter the barrier.
Purely so the other, less brave suitors can sail safely through the cleared channel toward their actual goal.
He is taking on the heavy lifting of the social rejection.
It's entirely combat-oriented.
It really is. What's fascinating here is the psychological bridge that gets permanently built into the English language during this era.
A bridge between the physical and the social.
Exactly. The literal physical risk of being the first boat in the freezing ocean translates seamlessly into the social and emotional risk of being the first person to attempt something highly volatile.
Wow.
Language is doing something profound by linking those two experiences. It's an evolutionary acknowledgement that social and emotional barriers can feel just as dense as physical ones.
And trigger the same fight or flight terror.
Right. Stepping up to face a hostile social situation feels like facing a frozen ocean because, to our brains, the threat of social death is deeply alarming.
It's a totally natural extension of the literal survival mechanism. But, the phrase didn't stay locked in that 16th century mode of tackling a massive life-threatening obstacle, did it?
No, it didn't. Over the next few centuries, the edge of the blade began to dull, so to speak.
It evolved from a metaphor about surviving a brutal trailblazing mission into describing a much more specific, passive, and frankly, much more relatable modern goal.
The desperate need to cure social awkwardness.
Yes.
The etymological research tracks this softening beautifully. The Oxford English Dictionary pinpoints the first purely social, non-combat use of the phrase to the late 18th century.
Okay, so a couple hundred years later.
Specifically, we see it in a 1795 travelogue by an author named Samuel Jackson Pratt.
Oh, right. The book is titled Gleanings Through Wales, Holland, and Westphalia.
Yes. And Pratt isn't writing about sailors or brave suitors. He's writing about the agonizing tension of polite society.
Pratt paints such a vivid, excruciating picture of a parlor room in this text. He describes walking into a room full of people, noting that there is an air of distance, reserve, and even coldness. They are all replete with an anxious desire to break the ice.
Just hearing an air of distance, reserve, and even coldness, you can instantly feel the rigid posture and the suffocating silence of that room just from his word choice.
Absolutely.
The research indicates that around the late 18th century, this kind of social coldness often implied a room thick with tension from past negative interactions.
No, like grudges.
Yeah, the icy reserve of people holding grudges, harboring unresolved conflicts, or rigidly adhering to strict class hierarchies.
All trapped in a room together.
Right. The ice wasn't just unfamiliarity, it was active, frosty avoidance.
But eventually, as society became more mobile and people interacted with strangers more frequently, the meaning shifted again.
It did. It stripped away the implication of past grudges.
And came to represent the pure, unadulterated awkwardness of a first encounter between two people who know absolutely nothing about each other.
Which brings us to the 19th century, where the phrase lands exactly in the register we use today.
Enter Mark Twain.
Yes. The linguistic article points to Mark Twain as the author who cemented this modern conversational usage.
In his 1883 memoir, Life on the Mississippi.
Exactly. Twain details a scene where two men are having a lengthy conversation about the river. But the narrator notes that they don't actually care about the river at all.
It's just filler.
Right. Twain brilliantly describes their mundane chatter about the water as a mere icebreaker and acquaintanceship breeder before they finally feel comfortable enough to pivot to the personal topics they actually wanted to discuss.
So what does this all mean? It means Twain's acquaintanceship breeder is the exact 19th century equivalent of logging onto a Zoom meeting and spending 3 minutes talking about the weather in your respective time zones.
Yes, before actually looking at the quarterly spreadsheet.
Exactly. When you break down the mechanics of small talk, the weather, the local sports team, the traffic, that mundane conversation is the little wooden rowboat.
It functions as a low-stakes ping, a sonar pulse to test the waters.
Yes, you are sending that low-stakes conversational boat out ahead to clear the path, to absorb the hits of any awkward silences or mismatched tones.
Because if the other person responds terribly to a comment about the weather, you haven't lost much.
Right. The little boat took the hit. But if they respond well, the ice cracks. You've made it safe for the heavy cargo to follow.
And the heavy cargo is the real conversation.
The business negotiation, the creative pitch, or just the actual terrifying vulnerability of getting to know another human being.
This raises an important question, though, about the fundamental nature of human interaction and how we evolved to manage it.
What do you mean?
Well, what the linguistic timeline highlights here is a major structural shift in how society viewed conversation. In the 16th century, you broke the ice strictly to achieve an external goal.
Right, to get the trade shifts through the Baltic, or to successfully marry the younger sister.
The ice was just in the way of the prize. But by the time we reach Samuel Jackson Pratt's parlor rooms and Mark Twain's riverboats, relieving social tension had become the primary goal itself.
Ah, I see.
Interpersonal coldness was formally recognized as a universal debilitating barrier. It was a cultural realization that before any real human connection, commerce, or relationship can happen, deliberate, conscious effort is required.
Effort to dismantle our innate wall of reserve.
Exactly. The breaking of the ice became an end in its own right because the silence itself was deemed intolerable.
You know, it is deeply validating to realize that. The fact that an entire linguistic framework had to evolve over hundreds of years, traveling from the frozen Arctic through the taverns of London and the parlor rooms of Wales, just to give us a tool to name how incredibly uncomfortable it is to talk to strangers.
We needed a vocabulary for the anxiety.
We really did. We have tracked an incredible journey today through this etymological source.
That's quite a ride.
We started with terrified sailors swinging heavy iron axes and hooks on frozen 16th century canals, risking their lives to keep early global trade moving.
Then we uncovered the mechanism of how that maritime terror bled into port cities.
Morphing into a trailblazing Shakespearean suitor tasked with taking the kinetic damage of a social shipwreck.
We felt the chilly, rigid reserve of an 18th century parlor room where the silence was thick enough to cut.
And finally, we arrived at Mark Twain's incredibly relatable use of small talk as a delicate social technology to bridge the gap between two strangers.
It is a remarkable linguistic journey that maps perfectly onto our psychological evolution. And, it leaves you with something rather profound to consider the next time you find yourself standing in one of those harshly lit conference rooms.
Staring at a lukewarm cup of coffee.
Exactly. If human language naturally evolved over centuries to equate the literal life-threatening danger of polar sea exploration with the sheer agonizing anxiety of talking to strangers at a gathering,
Yeah.
what does that reveal about the depths of our evolutionary fear of social rejection?
Wow.
Our brains literally equate a silent room of strangers with a freezing, deadly ocean. The threat of social isolation triggers exact same alarm bells as physical destruction.
That is a brilliant, slightly terrifying point. The fear of a silent room really is our modern frozen ocean. The stakes feel life or death to our nervous systems.
They absolutely do.
So the next time someone hands you a sticky note name tag and asks you to pair up and share a fun fact about your childhood, just remember, you aren't just playing a silly corporate game.
Not at all.
You are continuing a centuries-old, high-stakes tradition of sending a little wooden boat out into the dark, frozen waters, desperately hoping to carve out a safe passage for human connection. So take a deep breath, swing the axe, and break the ice.